Hello and welcome to the second episode of Career Conversations. Thank you so much for the feedback that we received for the first episode. It's nice to see that, so many people are resonating with some of the conversations that we have had and intend to have with this podcast. So, for our second episode today, we have decided to go with another, I would say, hot topic but still sort of unconventional discussion, and that is around artificial intelligence and how it has an impact on careers while also thinking about careers within artificial intelligence. And our guest for today is brother Essa Mohamedali. I'll allow him to start us off by introducing himself, telling us a little bit about where he is from, what he has studied, and how he ended up in this AI space.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here and exploring these more unconventional but hot topics. AI is the topic of the year right now, so I'm glad to be able to share whatever little I know. So getting into the background and how I ended up in the AI space. So originally I'm from Arusha, grew up there most of my life, studied at Jaffrey, and then came over to Dar es Salaam for university, where it was typical computer science kind of situation. But one of the things that my family, specifically my sister, really pushed is that if you're studying locally, the university might not give enough to explore my interests or such. So try and find other opportunities, events, and things that are going on in the space, in the ecosystem, as we like to call it. So through that, I got involved with an organization called Sahara Ventures, and they were exploring this idea of artificial intelligence and what are ways that the local economy and startups could benefit from the technology. And that's when I got involved as an intern. So it was a very serendipitous choice getting involved in AI. At that point, I knew nothing beyond the few things I had heard through movies and series, but got more and more involved day to day until eventually I just started being known as the AI guy. And that's kind of how I ended up in the space.
Interesting, and definitely a cool title to have in today's time and age, being called the AI guy. My name is Farhan Yusuf. I'm a pharmacist, a careers enthusiast, and the host for this podcast. I forgot to introduce myself at the start. But thank you so much, Essa, for that introduction. And we've had a lot of conversations where I think I've mentioned to you and many other people that I think one of the most important characteristics for young people to have today when they're thinking about careers, etc., I think is to be adaptive and to sort of have an open mind about a lot of these new opportunities and newer things that are coming up. And it's nice to know that that kind of openness is what led you on to this path of working in the space of artificial intelligence. So let's deal with the elephant in the room first, because I think a lot of people hear about artificial intelligence, they hear AI, but maybe they don't really know or understand what AI is. I know many of us don't. It has taken me some time as well to understand. So maybe let's start off with that. What is artificial intelligence?
Sure. So I'll start out with this, that as someone in the field, we don't like using the word artificial intelligence because it's this concept that is kind of beyond our own understanding at this point. Because if we look at it from trying to understand the terminology itself, there's artificial, which we understand being man-made or not naturally occurring, and then we have intelligence. But we're still seeking to understand what does intelligence mean. And one of the ways we break it down is based on different abilities or capabilities that illustrate that someone or something is intelligent. Part of that is aspects like visual recognition, looking at something and being able to identify this is a microphone. Another aspect is language processing, where we can speak to each other and understand context and intention behind the words that are spoken. And then we have skills like pattern recognition, seeing a series of events happening and being able to judge that this is what might happen next. I know, don't talk to mom for any favors before she's had her chai. I know that's a pattern, I can recognize it. And then what we've done is taking that dimension of intelligence, can we replicate parts of those intelligence in a machine or in an artificial way? Right now we use machines because it's what's shown to be the best option for replicating some of these skill sets. And that's what a lot of the AI systems we call right now are. They imitate specific intellectual capabilities. So either you'll have an AI that is very good at recognizing things. Think about self-driving cars. It can recognize what it sees through its cameras and make a decision. And then we have natural language processing, which the best example right now is going to be ChatGPT. You can talk to it in a very natural way, and it responds back in a natural way and seems to understand what was your intention behind the question. So that's kind of how we break down its capabilities and the intelligence side of things. But of course, intelligence is still a discussion in of itself. Is there more to intelligence? Is there different aspects that we can't quantify? And that's what makes it difficult to call something a true artificial intelligence. Rather, what we're doing is mimicking specific parts of what we might consider intelligence.
Interesting, and definitely aids with my understanding as well. And I think personally what I find fascinating about this whole conversation around artificial intelligence is just how philosophical it is while also being technical, and asking all these questions about how do we define intelligence, what is it, what are the components, etc. So thank you for that. And I also like the fact that you mentioned ChatGPT as a component or maybe one aspect of AI, because I think many a times what I have seen is that because right now there's all this conversation around ChatGPT, people almost think ChatGPT equals AI, but it's just one part of a much broader thing. One thing that I would also like you to differentiate, Issa, is what is the difference between AI and machine learning? Because I think that's also something that people use sometimes, even interchangeably. It's again one of those somehow related concepts that is spoken about a lot.
Sure. So, artificial intelligence is what we use as the overarching umbrella term. It's a term that, in of itself, its definition still is shaky and very broad and such. But there are subsets of concepts within artificial intelligence that we start to look at. One such subset is machine learning. And machine learning is exploring how can we use machines to be able to identify specific patterns that are occurring and the machine being able to learn those patterns. And typically this is a very data intensive task. What that means is we take historical record of events that have happened. For example, can we take the history of all the posts I've liked on Instagram to be able to predict what post would show up on my Instagram that I will still like. And the machine starts to learn those patterns and understand that, oh, this person likes seeing posts about technology, likes to see posts about cars or bikes, and keeps on feeding that content so that I continue to interact with it. And that's where machine learning gets a bit more specific.
Okay. Interesting. As I hear you speak and as I digest all the content around AI, machine learning, that's, plenty out there. I'm always thinking about how we are living in the age of sci-fi, especially for those of us who have been very interested in sci-fi movies, sci-fi books over the years. It does truly feel like we are living in the future, sort of. Isa, now that we have an understanding of what AI looks like, and you're someone who is pursuing a career within AI, I guess maybe talk to us about what does a career in AI look like, and what are some of the things that young people or students need to understand. What are the skills they need to develop? What are the kind of experiences that they need to have? I think that will be helpful for our listeners.
So let's start with what are the careers in AI in the first place. And there's a few ways to look at it, but the easiest division is there's non-technical AI career and there's a very technical one. I'm particularly on the non-technical side at the moment, which is looking more at project management consulting. Looks at overarching strategy and understanding what are problem areas that can benefit from the use of artificial intelligence, and how do we manage a project that is trying to leverage one of these technologies, from the ethics, the data privacy and such. That is a bit more of an unconventional path. The typical path is going to a much more technical side of things, which is where we are directly involved in the development of these kinds of systems. And of course, when we say a career in AI, at times it can branch a bit wider to include components under what we call data sciences. There's a number of overlaps between concepts in data science and AI, but for a lot of people at the beginning, there's enough overlap to consider it's the same, almost. So when we start getting more into these areas of data science and artificial intelligence, the technical side of things is very much dealing with data right now. Dealing with data and statistical methods to be able to create systems that are either learning patterns or have some form of vision ability or language ability. This involves coding, data analytics, data cleaning side of things, and programming aspects. So the technical side is very much sit on your computer, black screen hacker kind of vibes, but a lot more data involved in it. And those are kind of the areas. We're starting to see more emergence in non-technical fields where we need people who understand what are the options of the technologies that exist and how can they be applied to different domains like healthcare and education, and how do we build a sustainable solution. And then, of course, from there, we're getting more into research as well, where there are people, not common in Tanzania or East Africa to be very honest, but people who are pushing the limits of building these AI systems and getting more into what are the technicalities behind it and building a better technical system. We haven't seen much of that in East Africa or even at the African level. There are certain institutions that are doing great work there, but a lot of the focus we have is the application of the technology. How can it support agriculture? How can it support healthcare, education? A lot of conversation in impact sectors. These are sectors that we look at the benefit of people. So that's kind of what a career in AI looks like. The technical one for building skill sets is a bit more straightforward. There are specific hard skills that are meant to be built, looking at coding strengths, looking at data, logic, and of course the common frameworks and tools that exist. The non-technical is still being discovered because some people are going towards a policy and regulation point of view. Others are going to the management of projects. Others are going to a more application side of things, where how do we bridge the conversation between completely non-technical people and the technical people to build a solution that really solves a problem.
Interesting. I mean, I would consider myself a non-technical user of AI as well, especially in the health sector, because those conversations are coming up quite a bit in the sector in terms of how we can use AI to improve the healthcare, and more so even in Tanzania as a country. And that's a good segue into our next question, which is, what does a career with AI look like, right? And just to make a demarcation, here what we're talking about is that ideally the way the perception is right now and the way technology is moving, etc., AI will probably seep into a lot of different other careers, and as you mentioned, there's a lot of thought around how AI can impact different sectors, etc. So just a little bit of conversation around that, like what does a career with AI look like? And are there any industries that you think have been particularly impacted, or they are being discussed a bit more specifically? I mean, some examples that come to my mind is that, as I mentioned, there's a lot of AI discussion in healthcare, which is happening in Tanzania as well, for a lot of different things, diagnosing diseases, improving supply chains, etc. We know that there's a lot of discussion around AI in the entertainment industry, and currently there's strikes happening in the US, with the actors and with the writers, where they are trying to see how the incorporation of AI within that industry is going to change a lot of things, remuneration, etc. There's also a lot of discussion around art, right, with Dell E and some of these other softwares that I don't really know about, but I hear about them. But I know there's this whole conversation around how AI will impact art, and all of that. But I'm sure you probably know more about this than I do. So yes, what are some industries that you know of, and what does that look like according to you?
So, as artificial intelligence has been growing as a field, there's been a lot of discussion around, are we building tools to replace humans? And there are two schools of thought. There is the school of thought where the goal is to build what we call an artificial general intelligence. And this would be an intelligence at the level or beyond that of an average human being. So it would have the capabilities of an average human being or be beyond that. But there is a second school of thought that's like, that's not what we need. What we need are tools that can support existing humans. And this is what we start calling augmented intelligence, where we are now augmenting the capability of humans. And that's been the type of AI that we are predominantly seeing right now. And what this means is that we're getting more and more tools that are leveraging AI capabilities and could in some way or another support us in our day-to-day activities. The most famous example right now being ChatGPT. Of course, we're still discovering and understanding the limitations and capabilities of ChatGPT, but the best way to think of it, I like using the example of an intern. It's basically an intern that knows a little bit about everything, can get you started in some places, but they don't know enough to be independent with their work. You will still want to follow up with them, you will still want to check with them, you will still want to keep on pushing and prodding and trying to see what's the best response they can give you. And that's kind of the level that it's at right now, where it'll get you started, it can be good for brainstorming, but you wouldn't want them to be the independent author or publisher for anything. It's more of a sidekick right now. And these are the types of tools that we're seeing augmenting a lot of careers, where you have things like ChatGPT, yes, which are what we classify in the language space primarily. And then you have tools like DALL-E and Midjourney and Stable Diffusion that are image generators, where you describe a situation or a visualization and it creates that visualization. And then when we start seeing sectors that can benefit from this, graphic designers, project managers, consultants that can take multiple of these tools and it supports their workflow on a day-to-day. That means their efficiency, they're saving 2 or 3 hours a day. Some people choose to use this to do more work, others like us prefer to use that as more time to rest and relax. But that's the evolution we're seeing in terms of a career with AI. What it might look like in the future, honestly, is tough to tell, because which of these products and solutions, how might they evolve in the future? What's going to be accessible to the common person? The big reason AI is a big conversation for careers right now as well, and building a new career in that space, is because ChatGPT has become accessible. It is an AI tool that the only thing a person needs to use is an internet connection and a mobile device and to make an account with OpenAI. For some, they don't even need to do that. You can use Bing Chat and it's there, it's accessible, it's free. So it started to augment people's skill sets. Not yet to the extent where we can entirely replace people, Though in some industries we are seeing that happen with more technical focused versions of these tools. But we don't know what tool might be coming next. The field is rapidly evolving. There are a lot more tools that are in research, in the process of commercialization. Which of these hit the market, which of these are going to be at the scale at which the common person can access, is going to be very different. And when it comes to the industries that are being impacted, what this means is that the people with access to these tools, who know how to use these tools, are going to gain an upper hand. There is going to be a level of inequity because some people will have access, will know how to leverage the tools, and what this means is they're typically more efficient, or they might be more creative, or they might simply have more time to rest. And this in of itself can give an upper hand to someone who's working to produce the same type of work but has to take 2 hours extra, 3 hours extra to be able to do that. And that's the evolution that we're seeing right now.
So the sort of tricky slash kind of controversial word that comes to mind is efficiency, right? And how these things are going to make us more efficient, and what that means in terms of, us as human beings and how we do some of these tasks. So I like that you mentioned that the people with tools will probably be in a better position to access certain opportunities, because my next question was going to be, which you have touched on slightly, Isa, in the previous one. What are the long-term implications of artificial intelligence for career paths and professional development? And in an AI-driven society that we are clearly going towards, how can individuals future-proof their careers and remain relevant?
So in the technology world, we don't like the word future-proof because it's a very tough idea of, can we do stuff now to make sure that we're not irrelevant in the next 2 or 3 years or 5 years or 10 years? And the problem with technology is it typically evolves so quickly that we just don't know. So we don't like using the word future-proof. We don't know if we'll actually be able to do that. Instead, we like the idea of being adaptable. A lot of part of being in the tech world is being adaptable to the changes that are coming. And that's going to be the most important thing with whatever career path is a person is developing. They need to be willing to adapt as these new tools and resources come into play. Because the reality is, the technology is here. It's been here longer than most people realize. But AI is what we would call a back-end technology. It sits in the background, and if it's done well, most people wouldn't even realize that they're interacting with an AI. So, because it's like that, we've had things and resources and tools we're using that are already implementing it. The easy examples are things like Netflix and Spotify and YouTube and Instagram. All of these are using some form of machine learning or recommendation engines or AI in the background to decide what content to feed us. And it's been there for years. People just haven't realized that that's how it works. So when it comes to the future-proofing side of things, it's very tough. We don't know what's about to come. The best we can do is prepare to adapt as it comes.
And Isa, so just to discuss a little bit more on that. So, I mean, adaptation, one part of it is just happening, having an open mind and, being ready for some of these things. But I guess my question would be in terms of, maybe if we talk a little bit about, as we talked about the fact that if you want a career in AI, then there are certain skills and experiences that you need to have. When we are talking about a career with AI, are there any basic specific skills that people can gain to better understand AI? Are there any resources available out there that people can access? I think that might be good information to have as well.
Sure. So I would say having a basic understanding of the technology and its problem areas is a good starting place. But a lot of those resources go into the what is AI and how it functions in the background, which sometimes when using a tool isn't always necessary. Most of us don't know how our phones actually work in the background. And while I'm not saying that's the best approach to take for AI, it is an approach that a lot of people are taking, and rather understanding how the tool in of itself works, how does ChatGPT work and such. But still would recommend having that understanding. So there's some resources like AI for Everyone. It's a free course on Coursera that gives a very basic understanding on what is artificial intelligence, what are problem areas that it's most applicable to, how can someone start getting into that path to understand it. It's a very good intro course to get involved with. And of course, YouTube. We live in the age of YouTube and well now ChatGPT. So you could just ask ChatGPT to give you like a crash course on what is AI and simple ways to understand it. And it's one of those tools that's actually quite useful for doing that. Beyond that, the biggest problem we face is because a lot of these advancements are happening in the tech bubble. So people within the tech ecosystems are the ones that have a finger on the pulse on what's going on. Not all of that information translates to people outside the technology sector. So as much as we would want to say have awareness of what's going on, we understand it's not as straightforward that, oh, suddenly everyone should know what mid-journey or stable diffusion is. That doesn't always happen. So we will need to build more channels of communication for what are some of the tools and resources that exist and how are they impacting specific sectors. But for now, the best thing I can say is get a friend that is in tech that could give you updates like once a week about what's going on.
Definitely a helpful tip. I have quite a few friends, including yourself, who do update me about what's happening in the tech world, and that's definitely always insightful for me.
Who still stays adamant to not use ChatGPT.
Yes, I am one of those slow adapters myself, but with time, Isa, I think because a lot of our audience is students and young professionals, I think one thing very specifically now to talk about is I think there's a lot of conversation out there, or controversial conversation I would say, around using things like ChatGPT in education, as a student, as a young professional. Any tips and ideas on that? Because I know, I guess, the education sector is trying to catch up, and we see a lot of difference in terms of how different educational institutions are reacting to something like AI and ChatGPT, with some embracing it more wholeheartedly, coming up with specific policies, etc. But we know that will take time when you're thinking about the global implications. But as a student, what's a tip to be able to use that in a helpful way?
Disclose it, first of all. As much as that might seem counterintuitive for some education settings because we're using it to get our life easier, I find disclosing the fact that we're using it to be a lot more powerful, because we understand certain institutions will not be willing at the beginning especially. And a lot of people like to use the example of a calculator. When the calculator first came in, there was a lot of friction to it. People were like, oh, you're not going to have a calculator everywhere you go. We know that's not the case anymore. Simple addition, we still use calculators, even if we could, some of us still have the ability to do it in our heads, we still use it. And eventually we're going to see the same thing happen with AI. It's going to get more and more democratized. More people are going to have access to it, and the barrier to access is going to reduce. At least that's what we hope. But when it comes to actually, I think I forgot the question.
How can students use it? What's a tip for students?
Students use disclosure. That's where my train of thought was. I need an AI assistant as well. So with students actually leveraging the tool, we need to know where our teachers and schools are on that. Because one of the challenges is if we don't disclose its use and then we are found out later on, this can bring a lot of friction. That's a nice way of putting it. We've seen cases where students are expelled, have lost scholarships because they have been accused of using it. It hasn't even been confirmed that they've used it. Simply the accusation has been enough to revoke certain scholarships in some universities. And we need to look at it as an aiding tool, that it will aid our process, maybe in what we're doing at school, the learning activities, but because of the way our institutions are currently set up, not all of them are able to adapt in of themselves towards the new output that students are getting. We have seen some institutions that are highly encouraging the use of it and looking at how can they provide tasks and assignments that encourage the use, but at the same time take it with a critical approach in terms of look at the answer that ChatGPT gives you and identify where it went well, where it failed. How much would you rate the answer it gave in context with the content you're already studying, and looking at it from that much more critical lens?
Okay, thank you. And I mean, I guess the word for me here is aiding tool, and so everyone needs to think about how it can. I mean, what I find interesting is that on one hand you have people who are very worried about AI replacing us, and on the other hand you have people who are already using AI to replace themselves, right? In the sense that if you are constantly using some of these tools and not really criticizing it or critiquing that work, then essentially for me you are already replacing yourself. And so that's something that I find quite interesting. And I think, yes, it's a lot about what exactly you are doing. I guess I think for better research and stuff like that, it's probably quite helpful. And I have seen a lot of again, tools, guidance come up on how you can use ChatGPT for like better literature review, etc., when you're doing research. But then definitely it's a no for like transcribing things from a qualitative interview, right? Because you need to process some of that information yourself, and once you include, and of course a lot of this, as you mentioned, is a function of policies, guidelines, etc., and what is allowed and what is not allowed. So I guess the tip for the students is to understand what is allowed and what is not allowed and be within those realms, but then by all means use it for research, because essentially it's a better search engine in certain ways, right? And that's why it's being incorporated in certain search engines also. So yeah, keep those lines in mind, I think, is what would be helpful.
Find how to do what we call ethical hacking, being creative within the boundaries that have been prescribed to us. So one thing I like to do is if I'm using it to write an article or such, I will disclose that this is what I've used as to be able to do 1, 2, 3, and the rest of it is my own. Because at some point, some of these things will be brought into question. And the day it's been brought into question, you want to be able to say that here, I disclosed it, I was very upfront about this, rather than being caught red-handed or blindsided. Sure, in the future it might be more acceptable, but at this point in time, it still is a very contentious subject and topic.
Okay, thank you. And so to end, Issa, I think I always like to end my podcast by bringing it home, as they say, in the sense that I interact with a lot of people who, when you tell them about, let's say, artificial intelligence and all that, they'll tell you, oh, that's a developed world thing. Like, we don't have anything like that in Tanzania or in other sub-Saharan countries. It's going to take a lot of time for it to be here. But then, as someone who likes following up with these things, I do know that the technology is already here, it's being used in a lot of ways, but then I also know that you specifically are doing a lot of work to promote AI in Tanzania through a community, etc. So tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So I manage a community called the Tanzania AI Lab and Community. We keep things simple. So what we look at is basically anyone who's interested in the technology and would like to just understand more. We've set up some systems and structures in place and a community of practice for these people to get involved, get access to the network and resources and information they need to be able to learn more and then decide the direction they're going. And we have a few things we do, from basic events to meet people in the ecosystem to some policy development work that we've done, a lot of advocacy and awareness. We also had a podcast at some point that needs to be resurrected. Maybe this is the start of that again. Blog posts and such, and of course technical trainings. And then we are also looking at the application of the technology, because what we've seen is that as much as Tanzania might not seem like a hotspot, there is actually quite a lot going on. We have institutions and universities doing really good research here. We've seen startups coming up that are building tools and technologies and resources for the AI space, and a lot of it being focused on impact. And when we say impact, we mean sectors that benefit the common person. Healthcare, agriculture, education have been big areas that we're seeing application of the technology in Tanzania, from crop disease diagnostics to supporting health workers in diagnosing human diseases in rural areas. We've seen a lot of solutions come into the space. Of course, compared to the global market, it is still small, but there is a lot more going on than one would expect. And the community is kind of that melting pot where we bring everyone together so that we can increase collaboration and networking and such. And currently the community stands at slightly over 300 people across the country, all interested in AI in some way or another. And most of them are youth under the age of 30. So we've seen a lot of growth in that area, and things are looking good for the future.
Thank you. What a positive note to end the podcast
No,
on.
we're not ending yet, because now I'm going to representing the common person and the use of something like ChatGPT. What would you say is something that you feel is not appealing or hasn't attracted you enough yet to use these kinds of augmenting tools?
I think for me, Isa, the thing that I've always been a technology slow adapter from a very, for a very long period of time. I think that's probably one of the last people on this planet who started using WhatsApp. So I think generally for me, it's always about understanding a bit better. It's always about knowing, it's seeing the use cases, as they call them, about some of these things. And so I guess for me it's just that. But then and it will be different for different people, right? And I think what I like about some of the things that you mentioned is that AI is just a tool, right? Like a lot of the other technology that we have out there, it's a tool, and so the use of it will not necessarily be the same for for all the people. Different people will use it in different ways, different capacities, etc. Basic understanding is definitely important, I agree. But I think for me, it's just been the fact that it's still new, and I think I'm taking my time to understand it through platforms like this, having different conversations with different people, trying to understand a bit better, and trying to identify specific use cases, and not thinking about AI taking over my life and doing everything for me. I think for me, it's identifying where best to use it, to what end.
And that's very representative of the common person. Like, a lot of people right now that are using ChatGPT and such daily are very early adopters. These are people who are typically a bit more technically inclined. Like, they've played with a lot of technology tools, new things, and they're willing to try it. And that's part of the journey we're going to be going down. A number of training programs we've done, we've seen 60-70% of the people joining a session about what is ChatGPT and all of that have never interacted with it. So that's very representative of what the common person is looking at right now. A lot of people have heard it and are still very apprehensive, and that's not the wrong approach to take. It's good to have a healthy level of skepticism and apprehension with a lot of these new technologies, but still be open enough to play with it and one day see if it can actually do something that's useful. If it's not useful for you, don't have to use the tool. It is still a tool that we choose when to use.
Okay, even better note to end the podcast on. But yeah, thank you so much, Isa, for your time and for giving us all of this insight into the world of artificial intelligence. And I think for all those who are listening to this podcast, Isa is a resource. Feel free to reach out to him on how you can engage with the community and with AI in general, and also do engage with this podcast as well. Give us your thoughts about what you think as far as artificial intelligence is concerned, and let us know your questions, thoughts generally about what are the things you would like to hear on this podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.